So we have a global state management in our application. We are using Context API of React, but there is a popular alternative to this, Redux. For our application scope, using Context API is enough for global state management. Our state is not complex and it doesn't get updated frequently. So context is good enough for these conditions. But if the size of state increases and if it gets frequent updates, to have better performance in your application, Redux is a better choice. Also, Redux has developer tools, so it can be used to debug global state. Now, the Redux is describing itself as a predictable state container for JavaScript applications. It is not custom to React. It can be used in any JavaScript application. Redux can be described in 3 fundamental principles. Here in this section, in Thinking Redux, we have these 3 principles. And first one is single source of truth. The global state of the application is stored in an object tree within a single store. And the next principle is the state is read-only. The only way to change the state is to emit an action. And the action is just an object describing what happened. And here we see the samples. And the changes are made with the pure functions. To specify how the state tree is transformed by actions, we will be writing reducers, and the reducer function is just like this one. Let's demonstrate the flow of the Redux. So we have the components like the login page, navigation bar, and the others. And on the other hand, we have these Redux building blocks like the reducer and the state. And when we are logging in login page, we will be dispatching an action. This action will be telling about what happened. And it's going to be processed in this reducer function. And as a result, it's going to be generating a new state object. And the components dependent on this state will be notified and they will be updated. Now let's install Redux. For that, we run npm I Redux. Other than Redux, we will also install another library, and that is React-Redux. This is for binding our components to the Redux library. So let's install these. The packages are installed, and let's use Redux in our application. Now let's use Redux. We will be configuring the Redux and using React Redux components, and we will do that right here in the index.js. So first thing is we are going to import provider from React Redux, and we will be wrapping the app with this provider. We are going to replace this old context wrapper, the context usage, with the Redux, but currently the navbar or the login page are dependent on the context, so I will be keeping this one until the refactor with the Redux is completed. So let's use provider somewhere here. So we have this provider wrapping the app. So if we save at this point, and if we refresh the page, here we see an error. And this error is thrown because this provider requires a store object. So we are going to create a store, and for that one we are going to import create store from Redux. And let's say we will have this store here, and we call create store for this one. Now we have this store instance, and we will set it for this provider. Store will be this one. And if we save this, and if we refresh this one, now we have another failure. And this is because when we are creating a store, it is looking for reducer function. So reducer function is just a function. So let's say this is reducer, and it is just this one. Then we will be passing this reducer to store. Let's save this one, and let's refresh this. Now the errors are gone. Now let's practice what this reducer is about. This reducer is basically a function taking two parameters, and the first one is state. This is last known state of the Redux, and the second parameter is the action. And let's log them right here, logging an object having the state and action. And let's see this one right here. Let's refresh it. Here we see the state is initially undefined, and we have this action object, and the type is this one. An action is just a plain JavaScript object, and it has this type field. We can think of an action as an event that describes something that happened in the application. The type field should be a string which gives this action a descriptive name, and the init action we are seeing right here is triggered from this store create. Later we will be creating our own actions, and the reducer is a function, decides how to update the state if necessary, and returns a new state. Currently we do nothing about the state changes. We can think these reducers as an event listener, and they are basically handling the events based on these actions. So in state we are going to have, like in the auth context wrapper, we had this state. Let's copy this one, is logged in an ID. So here we can use this information to initialize this store, and we can do it like this. Let's have this as variable initial state, and it is this one. And for the second parameter of the create store, we can pass it initial state, and let's fix this typo here, initial state. And if I save here, and if I open the console once again, and if we refresh this one, now the state has value, and that value is the initial value we are setting right here. Now in this reducer we can do like this. We can just return state, and basically we will be returning it as it is. So let's save this one, and let's also open the developer tools. We have this Redux dev tools. Currently we don't see anything right here, and it is guiding us how to modify our store to make this dev tools to be able to access the store internal. So just clicking this one, it is opening this page, and here it is showing how we can allow this DevTools extension to be able to access to the store. Basically we are going to copy this line, and let's open the index. We will be passing this line as a third parameter, just pasting here to make sure I copied only the text part, so this one, and pasting as a third parameter right here. So let's save this, and let's open the DevTools, and let's refresh the application once again. Now we have this screen, and here we have this initial action, and right here it is showing the diff occurred in the state after this action, and the init action is not causing any diff. And here in the state we see the state of the Redux store, and currently we have this information. Now let's use Redux state in the navigation bar. In navbar we can use hooks to access to the store. So we can do like this. We can import from React Redux, and we will import use selector, and instead of using this auth context we will call use selector, and this is looking for a selector function. This function will be taking the store. The store is basically this state object, and from this state object we can take whatever we want. So let's return store itself, and let's assign this one to auth. Let's name it like this. So this is returning this object having this is logged in and ID as well. So here the is logged in is coming from store now. Then we are updating our layout from the store value. Let's save this one. It's not going to do any changes. But if we do something like this, if we change this one to true, let's save it. And if we refresh this one, here we are seeing the navbar is updated. And if we type, let's say, the user 25, and if we check this one, it navigates to 25. So basically it is taking the values from this state, and which is having this initial value. Other than using the hooks for accessing the store, there is another way to do this one, and that is a higher order component functionality, and that function is connect. And we can comment out this part. Now we are going to use connect right here. We will be extending the capability of the navigation bar. So this is going to be providing the store values as a prop to our component. And for selector behavior, we will have a function. Let's name this function as map state to props. And just like the selector we have here, this function will be called with the store, and basically it is going to be returning the elements we are looking for. And just like we did here, we did right here, returning all the store elements, we can do the same thing here. So this function is selecting all store values, and they are going to be part of the prop of our component. So we will be passing this function to this connect. Now in the component, we are not using the hooks anymore, but we are able to access to the store values via props. And basically now the replacement will be like this. We will be replace auth with props. And let's save this. And let's check the components right here. Here in the navigation bar, right here, we are receiving these props, the ID and is logged in. So this is another way to use Redux in the component. This approach is more suitable for the class components. And since we are using functional component, we can go with the hooks. So just undoing the hooks usage right here, removing the context, and replacing this props is logged in and props ID to auth ID, and also removing this map state to props and higher order component part. In your project, it is better to have a consistency in the way you are using the libraries. But in this course project, to show different approaches, I'm trying to keep all available samples in the source code. So I'm using this hook in the navbar. And if we check the test console, we have failures right here. But our Redux refactoring is not complete yet. We will be fixing all the failures in the upcoming refactoring part. Now we are using the store in navigation bar, and we are going to update this one in login page. So let's do that part. Here in login page, we were calling this auth on login success, which is coming from this context. Now we are going to use the Redux, and we are going to be dispatching an action, and this action will be processed right here in this reducer, and it's going to be updating this state. And as soon as this state is updated, the navigation bar will be reflecting the changes. So here we are going to use another hook of the React Redux, and that hook is use dispatch. So in this one, we are going to get the dispatch by use dispatch. And right here, instead of calling out on login success, we will do this thing, dispatch, and this is looking for an action. Action is just an object, and this action must have a type field, and this type is just a description about this action, and let's say this is login success. So it is up to us what we type here, but just try to be as descriptive as you can. And also we can pass additional data with this action object, and we can add anything we want. So I'm adding payload, and as a payload I'm just passing this object. So we are saying this is logged in true, and we are passing the ID of the logged in user. Now instead of calling this one, we are going to dispatch this action. Save this one, and let's try this one on browser. Here in the reducer we have this console log, so we will be seeing our action to be printed here. But first let's make the login page visible, so let's change this one to false, saving it. Somehow I need to reload manually to take the effects. You may be facing similar problems, but so I just wanted to let you know about it. So here the navigation bar is displaying the login, opening the login. Now I'm filling the form. Let's fill with the user one information. Now clicking login, and here after login we have this log printed, and here we have this login success, and here it has this payload saying this ID is 1 and is logged in true. So we can use that information right here and update this last state, then create a new one. So the implementation would be something like this. Here we can just check if action type is equal to login success, then we can create a new state object. But when we are dispatching this object, we may be passing just part of the existing state. So here in the reducer, we must be returning a state which is containing all the existing information previously. So it must be just changing the overridden parts but keeping the old values for other fields. So we are going to do something like this. First, we are not going to mutate this one, so we cannot say the state ID is this one, action payload ID. We are not going to do this mutation because the Redux is comparing this returned object against the last known state object, and if it finds a difference, then it notifies the listening components. But if we mutate this object, then it won't be able to find any difference. Therefore, our components will never be notified with the changes. So we are not going to mutate the state. We will be creating a new object. Let's call this one as new state. And basically we can take copy of this state object, and we can copy like this with the spread operator. Here we have a copy, but again you must be paying attention to this part. This is fine for this type of object, but if our object would have a nested object, so another object here which is having other fields, then this copy won't be having the copy of this another object. It's just going to copy the reference of it. Therefore you may be ending up with unexpected behaviors. So if your state object has a child object in it, then you must be doing deep copy. So this is fine for our object. So we got the copy of it. Then we are going to set ID, and we take the ID from action payload ID. Then we will be setting is logged in, and that's going to be action payload is logged in. Then we are going to return this new state, and let's save this one And let's open the browser. Let's refresh this one. And also let's open the Redux tool right here. Going to login, filling the form, user1, mail.com, password, hitting enter. And here we have this login success action. And here we are seeing the diff. The state, the previous state was having this is logged in false and the ID was 25. Now it is having this is logged in as true and the ID is currently logged in user ID. And here we can see the details of this action. The login success has this payload having this information in it. And the last state is like this. So this is properly updating the state. Instead of passing this is logged in as part of this payload object, we can just remove this one and we can let the reducer to update that part. So we can do something like this. Here, instead of taking this action payload is logged in, we can just say if this is login success, then we know that this is logged in going to be true. So login page would be just sending the data we can take from it. So let's save these changes as well. Now we don't need this auth context, so just removing this one and removing the unused imports. And since we were using this auth context wrapper both in the navigation bar and the login page, we are not needing this one in our index anymore. So just removing this one and also removing the import. Let's save these changes. Let's refresh the page. The application is reloaded. And if we check the components, here we have the router, we have provider, then we have the app, and the navigation bar right here is dependent onto the hook, the Redux selector, and also the login page is dependent onto the Redux for dispatching the actions. Now the implementation on browser is fine, but the tests are still failing. We will fix that in the next part.